Hulk Hogan's wife breaks down in tears at his funeral. Her emotional words will leave you speechless. In this heartfelt video, SkyDaily, wife of WWE legend Hulk Hogan, delivers a powerful and emotional speech at his funeral. What she said stunned the entire crowd, a touching tribute to a wrestling icon, a husband, and a hero to millions. Watch as family, friends, and fans gather to honor the Hulkster's legacy in an unforgettable moment of reflection, love, and raw emotion. Under a solemn Florida sky, where the breeze carried more weight than usual, a crowd gathered beneath a white tent veined with shadows and grief. Rows of white folding chairs stretched out across the manicured lawn, each one occupied by someone who had known him, as a legend, as a friend, or simply as a symbol. But today, there were no poses, no flexed biceps, no booming brother, echoing across arenas. This was not Hulk Hogan, the larger-than-life entertainer. This was Terry Bollea, the man, the husband, the father. And at the center of it all stood his wife, SkyDaily, trembling but resolute, preparing to deliver the most difficult words of her life. The moment was so still that even the flutter of the American flag nearby felt deafening. Sky clutched the sides of the lectern as if it were the last thing tethering her to the earth. Her breath caught. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not the fans or the media, but the real people. Brooke and Nick, sitting in the front row, red-eyed and stunned. Wrestlers from every era sat behind them, Ric Flair, his face etched with sorrow, Triple H, his head bowed, Vince McMahon, unusually silent, clasping a funeral program with whitened knuckles. The Undertaker stood in the back, his silhouette unmistakable. Even in mourning, the locker room showed up for their own. Sky's voice, though cracked with emotion, carried. "I never thought I'd have to do this," she began, each word punctuated by silence thick enough to swallow the wind. "And I never imagined it would come this soon." She paused. Not because she was unsure, but because every syllable she uttered came wrapped in a memory. Her eyes flicked to the casket behind her, simple, regal, and draped in red and yellow flowers. The same colors he had made iconic. The same colors that once blazed across TV screens as millions watched a man with unmatched charisma shake the ropes and lift giants like they were made of paper. But Sky wasn't talking to the legend. She was talking to the man who held her hand through her darkest nights, who made late-night grilled cheese sandwiches when sleep wouldn't come, who made her laugh with stories of travel mishaps and backstage chaos that only she would ever know. "He was so much more than the man you saw in the ring," she said, her voice breaking. "He was my compass. My calm. My reason to believe that even in this crazy, loud, spotlight-drenched world, love could still be quiet and real." Tears began to pool in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She wanted the world to see. She wanted them to know that grief wasn't weakness. It was love in its rawest form. She recounted their first meeting, not with glamour or flash, but with honesty. "He was nervous," she said, smiling through the pain. "You'd think Hulk Hogan didn't get nervous. But he did. With me. He asked if I wanted a drink 3 times in 10 minutes and forgot what he was drinking himself." The crowd chuckled lightly, a needed breath amid the weight of the moment. Sky let the laughter linger. He was human. And that's what made him a hero. Not the muscles. Not the fame. But the heart he carried under all of that. She spoke of private moments. Quiet car rides where they talked about the world beyond wrestling, where Terry confessed his fears about legacy and forgiveness, about whether people would remember him for the right reasons. She spoke of how he doted on his children, even when the cameras were off, how he would call Nick just to tell him he believed in him, or leave Brooke long voicemails with unsolicited advice about music contracts and life choices. Terry was terrified that the world had seen him, but not known him, she said, her voice now steadier. "But I'm here to tell you, the man you loved? He was exactly who you thought he was. Just softer. And funnier. And more fragile than any of us really knew." The wind stirred again, a whisper through the tent, almost as if carrying his presence. Sky placed her hand gently over her heart and whispered, "He's still here. He'll always be here." As the sun cut through the gray clouds, a single beam of light fell across the casket, casting a glow that made every eye in the room instinctively shift toward it. Sky looked at it too, her lips trembling into a smile. "I used to joke with him that he was the sun," she said. "Too bright, too loud, always burning. And now, even in death, he's still lighting us up." The ceremony paused for a moment of silence, and in that pause, the crowd could feel the loss. Not just of a wrestler, but of an era, a force, a man whose voice had become woven into the soundtrack of millions of childhoods. The man who made people believe that vitamins, prayers, and believing in yourself could change the world. Sky resumed, her tone more intimate now, as if she were reading from a letter meant only for him. "You gave everything, Terry. Your body, your time, your soul. You never knew how to slow down. You carried pain in places no one could see. You smiled through surgeries. You traveled when you should have rested. You loved this world, this business, even when it broke your heart." A sob escaped her lips, unfiltered, and she covered her face momentarily. The crowd stood still. No one moved. No one dared break the moment. "And now," she said after a long breath, "you rest. And we carry you. In the stories we'll tell. In the music we'll hear. In the echoes of every fan who will chant your name when they remember what it meant to believe." Sky's gaze drifted upward, as if to the heavens, her tears now streaming freely. "I will love you forever. Not because you were famous. Not because you were Hulk Hogan. But because you were mine. You were my Terry." A beat passed. Then another. The weight of those words hung in the air like incense, heavy, fragrant with meaning, impossible to ignore. And then, without cue or instruction, the crowd slowly stood. One by one, rising in reverent silence as Sky stepped down from the podium. A hush blanketed the tent, but it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of love. Full of remembrance. Full of everything the Hulkster had given, not just to the world, but to the woman who now had to carry on without him. Sky returned to her seat, greeted by a warm, tearful embrace from Brooke and Nick. And for a moment, as the casket was prepared for the final blessing, a familiar chant began softly in the distance. "Hogan. Hogan. Hogan," not shouted. Whispered. Reverent. Almost like a prayer. It wasn't about the wrestling legend anymore. It was about the man they loved, the man Sky had just brought to life one final time. Moments later, a pastor approached the pulpit. His voice low, calming, offering verses of solace and the hope of eternal peace. Yet the echo of Sky's words still lingered. Even as the crowd bowed their heads, many were not praying to God, they were praying to memory. To the idea that somehow, in some way, they could hold on to him a little longer. Sky remained seated, her head down, her hands knotted tightly in her lap. But inside her heart, a storm of moments raged. She could hear his laugh, the way he would tease her about always being the tough one. She could see him hunched over his phone, reading fan messages, tears forming in his eyes when a letter from a child battling cancer came through saying he was their reason for fighting. She remembered his hands, those enormous, calloused, world-famous hands, brushing her hair behind her ear when she cried at night, whispering that it was okay, that everything would be okay. But now, nothing felt okay. As the pastor stepped away and the choir prepared to sing, Sky rose once more. Unexpectedly. She hadn't planned it. It was instinct. She returned to the front, and the choir fell silent. All eyes turned back to her. She wiped her eyes and said softly, "There's one more thing I need to say." Silence again. She turned to the casket and spoke not to the crowd, but to him. "You always said you weren't perfect. That the world saw Hulk Hogan, but not Terry. That you made mistakes. That you didn't always get it right." Her voice cracked again, but this time there was steel behind it. "But you did get it right. You loved me, and I loved you. That's the only truth that matters now." A ripple of tears rolled across the faces in the crowd. And if you're up there listening, babe, she whispered, I forgive every mistake. I cherish every kiss. And I promise, I'll keep going. Not because I want to, but because you'd want me to. She stepped down for the final time. Her heart shattered, her spirit exhausted, but her soul at peace. She returned to her seat just as the choir began their rendition of Amazing Grace. The first few notes carried like fragile feathers in the wind. Somewhere in the back, an old wrestling fan clutched a poster, not of Hulk Hogan body slamming Andre, but of Terry hugging a child backstage. It wasn't the legend people cried for, it was the man behind the legend. As the final note echoed through the air, and pallbearers, including wrestlers and close friends, prepared to carry him away, Sky stood once more. She followed behind them, her hand never leaving the side of the casket. Step by step, she accompanied the man she loved, the man she'd just eulogized with trembling courage and unrelenting love, to his final resting place. But before the casket was placed into the hearse, she leaned forward, pressed her lips gently to its lid, and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. You're free now, my love. Rest easy. And save me a place, right next to you. As the hearse pulled away from the chapel, escorted in solemn formation by security and family, the silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was sacred. The crowd remained still, eyes tracking the vehicle like it carried not just a body, but decades of memories, joy, pain, resilience, and history. Sky watched it go until the last shimmer of chrome disappeared beyond the garden hedges. She didn't cry then. The tears had already come and gone in waves, unpredictable and fierce. What settled now was something deeper, a quiet, aching stillness that echoed inside her like the fading roar of a once thunderous crowd. This was no longer about ceremony. It was about carrying on. She turned to return inside the chapel hall, where mourners had begun to drift into small huddles. Whispers of shared memories rippled through the space. Some talked about WrestleMania 3. Others recalled backstage moments, goofy pranks, quiet generosity. But none of those conversations carried the drama of stardom. They were all rooted in the humanity of the man. In a quiet corner, Sky sat down beside Ric Flair, who wiped his face with a handkerchief and gave her a nod that said everything words couldn't. The two had known each other through the decades of wrestling's most electrifying era. But today, they were simply survivors of a generation now slipping into legend. He was proud of you, Rick said hoarsely. You made him better. Sky squeezed his hand. He made me believe in something again. Nearby, Triple H leaned against a wall, silent and still, his eyes bloodshot, holding a funeral program between his fingers. On the cover was a photograph, not of Hogan in the ring, but of Terry Bollea laughing on a beach, barefoot, windswept, his arms wrapped around Sky as the sun fell behind them. That was the man they buried today. Not the icon. The husband. Nick and Brooke spoke with small groups of close friends and relatives, but their faces showed the strain. Brooke clutched a pendant Hogan had given her years ago, a tiny cross that now seemed far heavier than its chain. Nick, quiet and withdrawn, kept glancing toward the back doors as if expecting his father to walk through, flashing a grin and telling everyone to stop crying, to keep their chins up, brother. And yet, despite the sadness, there was something sacred in that chapel. As stories flowed and tears were shared, it became clear, the man they buried would never truly be gone. Not from the hearts of those who knew him, loved him, and believed in the gospel of Hulkamania. A slideshow played silently in one corner of the room. Childhood photos, early wrestling shots, moments with his children, candid clips with Sky. One photo in particular made Sky stand still. Terry holding their dog in one arm and flipping pancakes with the other, wearing an apron that said "World's Greatest Husband." She smiled through a fresh flood of tears. People approached her slowly, with careful steps and softened voices. He changed my life. He was the reason I started watching wrestling. He made me believe in myself when I had nothing. Sky nodded, thanked them, hugged them. She never rushed anyone. It was as if she knew, each of them was letting go in their own way. Later that afternoon, a private reception was held in the adjacent garden. Tables were lined with flowers, photos, and handwritten letters fans had sent in over the years. One table displayed a championship belt, glimmering under the soft rays of the sun, surrounded by messages written by children, thanking Mr. Hogan for inspiring them to be brave. Sky approached that table and stood quietly for several moments. She picked up a letter from a young boy with leukemia who wrote 2 years ago. "Dear Hulk Hogan, I'm not scared of needles anymore because I pretend I'm strong like you. My mom says you're not a real superhero, but she's wrong. You're mine." Sky placed a hand on the belt. "He would have loved that," she whispered. Just then, Jimmy Hart approached with misty eyes, holding a small recording device. "Sky," he said gently, "we were supposed to do this podcast next week." He wanted to talk about retirement, about peace. He was going to tell everyone how you saved him. Sky shook her head, emotion catching in her throat. "I didn't save him. He saved himself. I was just there to witness it." As the evening sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the garden, Sky stood before a cluster of guests, holding a small piece of paper. Her voice wavered, but she spoke. "I want to thank all of you. Every one of you who showed up, who wrote letters, who shared stories. You're his legacy. Not just the matches, not just the titles, you." She paused, clutching the paper tighter. "There's a quote I read once. It said, 'Grief is just love with nowhere to go.' But that's not true. Today, I've seen exactly where that love goes. It lives on. In every chant. Every memory. Every child he inspired." The crowd nodded solemnly. Some wept. Others closed their eyes in silent reverence. Sky folded the paper and looked up. "Today, we said goodbye to a hero. But I want you to remember, heroes never really die. They live in every life they touch." And Terry, my Terry, touched more lives than he ever knew. She stepped down, and for the first time since the service began, the crowd clapped. Not in applause, but in tribute, a gentle rhythm of farewell, of gratitude, of love that refused to be extinguished. As dusk settled over the garden, the lights flickered on. The sound of the ocean echoed faintly in the distance, and Sky sat alone by the altar of flowers, her hands in her lap, her face lifted toward the sky. And though the man she loved now belonged to history, his presence filled the air, in the wind, in the warmth, in every breath they all took. Because legends never truly die. They just go home. As the sun fully disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the Florida sky drenched in soft twilight hues, the garden emptied slowly, respectfully. Mourners filtered out in waves, some still in hushed conversation, others lost in their own silent reverence. But SkyDaily remained. She sat alone now, on the very bench where she and Terry had once planned their future together. Back when the world still made sense. Back when his laughter still bounced off the trees and his voice could still be heard echoing through these paths. Her dress rustled softly in the breeze, but she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the flickering candle that sat beside the photograph of her husband, not as Hulk Hogan, but as the man he truly was to her, Terry, smiling wide, barefoot in the sand, and holding her hand like it was his most precious possession. She pulled a small journal from her handbag, leather-bound and aged with time. This wasn't just any notebook. It was the one she'd kept since they met. Filled with memories, small notes, private thoughts, and sometimes, words she had never dared to say aloud. She flipped through pages of joy, fear, ordinary days, and extraordinary moments. And then she found it, the final page, blank and waiting. With shaking fingers, she uncapped her pen and began to write. "My love." The entry began. "I thought today would break me. I thought losing you would be the end of everything. But sitting here now, surrounded by the people whose lives you touched. The fans, the wrestlers, your children, your friends, I realize something. You never left. Not really. You've become a part of all of us. You're in every little boy who still wants to flex in the mirror and shout, 'Whatcha gonna do?' You're in every little girl who grows up believing strength isn't just for men. You're in me, in the way I'll carry your values, your kindness, and your fight to protect what matters. She paused, tears falling silently onto the page. But she kept writing. You once told me that when the time came, you didn't want people to remember you just for the yellow trunks or the leg drops. You wanted them to remember the man who showed up. Who tried. Who kept fighting. Who loved hard. I remember, Terry. I remember all of it. Every silly joke. Every quiet night in. Every time you reached across the table just to touch my hand and remind me you were there. And every time you let your guard down, just for me. She closed the journal gently, pressing her hand to the cover as if sealing it with a kiss. The wind picked up, gentle and cool, carrying with it the soft sounds of the ocean, their ocean. The same one they'd walked beside for hours, dreaming of growing old together. It was in that moment that Sky stood up, the candlelight reflecting in her tear-glassed eyes. She walked to the ocean's edge, barefoot now, dress billowing behind her, the sand cool beneath her feet. The waves lapped quietly, and the stars emerged one by one, blinking slowly to life like the stage lights that had once followed him across decades of fame. She knelt and whispered something into the surf, words only the water would carry. A secret. A goodbye. A promise. And then, something extraordinary happened. The clouds that had loomed overhead began to part, revealing a full moon that bathed the beach in silver. The candle by the altar didn't flicker out. It grew brighter, steadier, as if his presence had anchored it in place. From behind her, soft footsteps approached. Brooke. Nick. Jimmy Hart. Triple H. Even Ric Flair, leaning heavily on a cane, made his way forward. One by one, they joined her, forming a quiet circle on the beach, their hands clasped, their hearts broken but bonded. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The waves spoke for them. The sky bore witness. And the man who once told millions to say their prayers and take their vitamins, was now a prayer himself. A wish carried on the tide. A legend turned guardian spirit. Later, as the group dispersed, Sky remained at the shoreline. The moon above reflected in her eyes as she whispered a final message into the wind. You're my forever. She turned away then, slowly, walking back toward the lights of the garden, toward the chapel, toward a life forever changed. A life now divided by before and after. But not a life broken. A life carried forward. In memory. In love. In legacy. The days that followed were a blur. Phone calls, messages from fans around the world, interview requests, endless headlines. But Sky kept her distance. She didn't want a spotlight. She had lived in his for long enough. Now, she wanted only peace. She spent mornings rereading old notes he'd left her, scribbled on napkins and tucked into lunchboxes. Miss you already, babe. Back in 5, love you more. Don't forget you're my miracle. And at night, she'd sit on the porch of their home, wrapped in one of his old sweatshirts, watching the stars and humming the tune of a song he once sang terribly off-key. Nick and Brooke stayed close. The family leaned on one another, healing slowly in the quiet rhythm of grief. They began planning a foundation in his name, one focused not on wrestling, but on healing. A center for veterans and children, a tribute to the man who loved giving back far more than he ever let on. Sky would speak at the launch event. But not yet. She was still mourning. Still learning how to speak without breaking. Still learning how to be a widow, a word that felt too sharp, too final. Then, on the 7th night, something shifted. She walked into the living room and found a dusty old VHS tape resting on the coffee table. Not there the day before. She turned to the bookshelf. There, tucked between his wrestling DVDs and old promos, was a handwritten label she'd never noticed before. Terry to Sky, just in case. Her breath hitched. She slid the tape into the old player and watched the screen flicker to life. And then, there he was. sitting in his armchair, wearing a t-shirt and a soft smile. "Hey babe," he said, as if no time had passed. "If you're watching this, well, then I guess I had to go." She collapsed into the couch, hand over her mouth, tears cascading. "I just wanted to tell you that I love you. I loved you. Every single day. You made me believe that I could be something more than Hulk Hogan. That I could just be Terry, and that was enough." He paused, looked off camera, then smiled again. "I know you're hurting. But you're the strongest person I've ever met. And you'll get through this. Just promise me you'll keep laughing. Keep dancing in the kitchen. Keep looking at the stars. And don't stop loving this crazy world, because you're the best part of it." He leaned forward, closer to the camera. "And Sky? Don't be afraid to move on. When the time comes. When your heart says it's okay. I'll always be with you. Always." The screen faded to black. She didn't move for a long time. When she finally stood, she walked to the window and looked up at the night sky, the same sky they'd shared so many times before. And for the first time since the funeral, she smiled. Because in that moment, she knew the truth: love like his doesn't end. It echoes. Forever. In the months that followed, life began to reshape itself, not in the way SkyDaily had once planned with Terry by her side, but in a quieter, more intentional way. There were no more phone calls from promoters, no more backstage passes to manage, no more travel bags hurriedly packed for the next appearance. Instead, there were long walks through Clearwater's neighborhoods, handwritten journal entries each morning, and cups of coffee sipped on the porch where they used to sit side by side, watching the sun climb out of the Gulf. But while Terry was no longer physically there, his presence remained ever near. Sometimes it was in the form of a song playing unexpectedly in a store, his favorite, "Free Bird," drifting through a quiet speaker. Other times it was in the laughter of a stranger's child playing on the beach, reminding her of the carefree joy he carried even in the final years of his life. Sky began working with the newly launched Terry Bollea Foundation, a nonprofit built in his name to help children battling illness and veterans in need of recovery. It had been an idea they spoke about often during late-night talks. "Babe," he would say, "I've been blessed with so much. I want to make sure I leave something behind that matters." Now she was making good on that promise, not because she had to, but because it was how she kept him alive. She took no salary. No fanfare. Most people never even realized she was the one behind the initiative. That's how she wanted it. Quiet. Meaningful. Real. The foundation's first project was a pediatric rehabilitation wing at a hospital in Tampa. It bore his name in golden letters, the Hulk Hogan Hope Center. On the day of its unveiling, Sky wore one of his old red bandanas tied around her wrist, tucked beneath the sleeve of her dress. She walked through the halls, watching children ride wheelchairs shaped like race cars and therapists wear bright yellow shirts that read "Train. Pray. Believe." Every corner of the building radiated his energy, not the fame, but the fight. The belief that anything was possible if you just refused to give up. Outside the hospital, a small statue had been erected. Not of Hulk Hogan posing mid-leg drop, but of a man, barefoot in jeans, arms open in a hug. Underneath it was a simple inscription: "To the man who taught us to keep going. Always." Sky knelt beside it that evening, long after the crowds had gone home. She pressed her fingers to the base and closed her eyes. "Terry," she whispered, "you're still changing lives. Even now." Elsewhere across the wrestling world, tributes continued to pour in. WrestleMania featured a memorial montage, and WWE officially inducted him, again, into the Hall of Fame, this time posthumously, not just for his impact in the ring, but for his work outside of it. The crowd stood for nearly 10 minutes, chanting his name. Hogan's famous line, "Whatcha gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you," had taken on new meaning. Now, it wasn't about dominance or bravado. It was about legacy. About how love, courage, and perseverance run wild in the lives of those who carry on after great loss. Back at home, Sky slowly began to live again. She laughed more. Cooked his favorite meals. Spent time with Brooke and Nick. She even started writing, not about grief, but about healing. A quiet blog, under a pseudonym, where she poured out her heart to strangers who had become family. And then, one morning, a letter arrived. It was from a boy in Wisconsin, age 14, who had battled a rare illness. The letter was short and printed in uneven block letters. Dear Miss Sky, I never knew Mr. Hogan, but I heard he was brave. My mom says he made people feel strong. I wanted to tell you that since he died, I've been trying harder. I don't skip my therapy now. I eat my veggies even though I hate them. And when it's hard, I think of what he'd say. I think he'd say, don't quit. So I won't. Sky smiled through her tears. She picked up her pen and wrote back, Dear Daniel, you're exactly right. He would tell you to keep going. And he'd be so proud of you. I know I am. Thank you for reminding me that even when we lose someone, their voice can still be the loudest part of our day. You are strong. You are brave. And you are never alone. That became her rhythm. Finding hope in the echoes. Finding purpose in the quiet. On the 1-year anniversary of his passing, a small private gathering was held at the beach. No press. No cameras. Just family and friends. They built a bonfire, shared stories, played his favorite songs, and wrote messages to him on slips of paper that they placed into the flames, the smoke carrying their love to the sky. Sky stood last. She held her note tight against her chest before placing it in the fire. I'm okay now, she said softly. Still broken. But I'm okay. The flame flickered. The waves rolled in. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear his voice again. Gentle this time, not the booming Hulkamania call, but the whisper he saved just for her. I knew you'd make it. As the fire dimmed and the stars stretched overhead, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the night air fill her lungs. The grief hadn't vanished. It never would. But it had changed. Softened. Become a part of her, not a weight, but a shadow that reminded her where the light used to shine. And she knew this for certain, she would keep going. Not just for herself. But for him. For every fan who believed. For every child who fought harder. For every person who needed to hear the message he lived by, believe in yourself. Fight for what's right. Never give up. The world had lost Hulk Hogan. But love, real love, never dies. It transforms. And through the woman who loved him most, he lived on. Always.